Okay. Welcome, everyone. My name is Daniel Ekman. I'm sure you all know me, so I'm not going to do a big introduction because really this is more about an idea and a concept that I was actually first introduced to in a more in kind of my just my church setting, but this is not about that at all. This is about all the research and all the information that exists about it as a kind of not connected with religion at all, but just as a kind of leadership concept and best practice, which I'll admit I knew the idea and I always had kind of thought, well, this is how I want to model my leadership, but I didn't know all of the information and research that existed around it already. So that I found fascinating. And there's really a lot of great things I think to learn. And I learned a lot just from putting this together too. So if we go to the next slide, it'll be just kind of an introduction slide. So we're going to do a quick introduction. I'm just going to talk a little bit about where I found, not where I found, but essentially what I found out about the history of this concept. So the next slide, we'll talk about the person who introduced it. And I didn't realize, again, like I said, that there was all this research going back quite a long time on this specific idea of servant leadership that had, again, I always thought this was a religious concept, but actually doesn't really is not. It's actually a concept that was coined in the 1970s by this person named Robert K. Greenleaf. And there's a whole institute now that has his name on it that's about just servant leadership. And he published literally an essay called The Servant as Leader. So he's kind of seen as the forerunner, I guess, the person who came up with this whole concept. And his quote that I really like in here, the servant leader is servant first. It begins with the natural feeling that no one wants to serve first. Then conscious choice brings one to aspire to lead. That person is sharply different from one who is a leader first, perhaps because of the need to assuage an unusual power drive or to acquire material possessions. The leader first and the servant first are two extreme types. Between them, there are shadings and blends that are part of an infinite variety of human nature. So that's a really wordy way of putting it. So I want to try to summarize it. Basically, what he's talking about is that there's these different mentalities that people have. One is that they want to be in charge. That would be leader first. Leader first basically means I want to be in charge. I want to have control over things. I want to be the one who people go to for all the decisions. Serve first or servant first is the idea of I want to be the one that's basically helping first. I want to be the helper. I want to be doing things for others. I want to be at the ground level taking actions, but in a way that benefits others first. And that essentially the last sentence is just saying, you know, there's these two types of mentalities or two ways of thinking, and then there's all sorts of different, between them, there's different mixes of those two things. So there's a leadership mentality, there's a servant mentality, and then there's many different ways that in between those two that mix together. But essentially, that's how he sees the way people think. The difference manifests itself in the care taken by the servant first to make sure that other people's highest priority needs are being served. The best test and difficult to administer is, do those served grow as persons? Do they, while being served, become healthier, wiser, freer, more autonomous, more likely themselves to become servants? And what is the effect on the least privileged in society? Will they benefit or at least not be further deprived? So his question he was asking in his early work was, if you're trying to serve other people first, what benefit does that give to the person being served? You know, does that make them not just better people, but does it make them more likely then to become servants themselves? In other words, kind of pass it on. I use the analogy of there used to be, and there probably still is, this movement where someone would, pay for the person's drink behind them. And then the person behind them would say, oh, that's nice. I'm going to pay for the person's drink behind me. And they would call it, you pass it along, is what they would say. You would do something for someone else, and then that person would do something for someone else. So the idea of that you kind of carry through that benefit to other people. So that's the question he wanted to ask: is does that happen when you're, doing this? So if we go to the next slide, a servant leadership focuses primarily on the growth and well-being of people and the communities to which they belong. While traditional leadership generally involves the accumulation and exercise of power by one at, quote, the top of the pyramid, servant leadership is different. The servant leader shares power, puts the needs of others first, and helps people develop and perform as highly as possible. That last sentence, I think it says it all. Really, the idea with the servant leadership is that instead of being at the top of the ladder or the top of the structure, your job is to develop the people around you to become sort of leaders in and of themselves, because you're always putting the needs of other people first. So your job as a servant leader is not really about developing yourself at all. It's about you're developing other people around you. You're serving to create other leaders. That's really what servant leadership is you're creating people that have the needs met and have the power and have the development to be able to be their own leaders. So you're kind of, as a servant leader, more facilitating leadership. And then this is what he discovered. This is my thesis. Caring for persons, the more able and the less able serving each other, is the rock upon which a good society is built. Whereas until recently, caring was largely person to person, now most of it is mediated through institutions, often large, complex, powerful, impersonal, not always competent, sometimes corrupt. If a better society is to be built, one that is more just and more loving, one that provides greater creative opportunity for its people, then the most open course is to raise both the capacity to serve and the very performance as servant of existing major institutions by the new regenerative forces operating within them. So his idea is if you create a society of people that serve each other, you're more likely to get better outcomes. And if you have better outcomes, you'll have a better society. Whereas if you kind of just take someone and put them in charge of something, particularly if it's a large institution, it can be a lot harder to get that same outcome, because then you have these layers that exist between the person and the people that are kind of needing the benefits. So you have a big gap that exists. So if we go to the next slide. Put simply, servant leaders focus the lion's share of their energy on helping others grow. While traditional leadership styles typically involve wielding power to affect outcomes, servant leaders take a different approach. They believe sharing rather than appropriating power and influence encourages diverse, inclusive ideas that make the world a better place for everyone. I kind of think of this as, I mentioned the word facilitate before. Really, a servant leader's job is to facilitate leadership, not, traditional leadership is more about how do I take the power I have to make things happen the way I want them to happen. Really, as a servant leader, my job is much more focused on how do I take the leadership ability that already exists with the people that are around me, and how do I get them power so that they're able to share their own ideas and kind of be, I'm like a sounding board more. How do I take all these diverse ideas and put them all together so that we have the best outcome possible? The idea is the more diverse thinking we have, the better the outcomes we're going to have. If we go to the next slide, and this is where I'll probably spend more time talking in detail, because we can all think of examples where we've kind of demonstrated these. These are the things that were identified as qualities of a servant leader. So in other words, what do you do if you're a servant leader? What are the things that are important? So the first one that was mentioned is listening. And this is a very important one, because if you really think about something like listening, if you're going to be facilitating other people's leadership and helping them develop, one of the most important things is you have to meet them where they're at, and listening is a huge part of that. So it says leaders have traditionally been valued for their communication and decision-making skills. Although these are also important skills for the servant leader, they need to be reinforced by a deep commitment to listening intently to others. That's very important. It's really with a servant leader, it's about how well am I hearing what others are telling me? And am I really getting their message that they're trying to get across to me? The servant leader seeks to identify the will of a group and helps to clarify that will. Again, like a facilitator of a group. He or she listens receptively to what is being said and unsaid. So understanding if maybe someone isn't saying something directly, but maybe you know there's something there, and your job is to try to find out, okay, what is that thing that maybe isn't being said, but that I still need to hear? Listening also encompasses hearing one's own inner voice. Listening coupled with periods of reflection is essential to the growth and well-being of a servant leader. So yeah, being able to listen is very important. And the inner voice part is, we all as leaders have different styles of leadership. And a lot of times we have to develop instincts for how to develop ourselves as leaders as well. So how do we develop our own style? How do we hear ourselves when it comes to things, even like self-care? You have to be able to listen to yourself well to be able to do self-care well. And then it's the same thing with listening to the group. You're in some ways, listening to yourself is great practice for how do I listen to other people. So the next slide, we'll get into another quality, which is really important, empathy. And I think it's fair to say all of us have a good level of empathy, or we probably wouldn't be here right now. The servant leader strives to understand and empathize with others. People need to be accepted and recognized for their special and unique gifts. So again, as a servant leader, I'm not trying to get more people to be like me or to aspire to be me. I'm trying to get people to be their best selves, to be the best that they can be based on themselves, not based on me. One assumes the good intentions of coworkers and colleagues and does not reject them as people, even when one may be forced to refuse to accept certain behaviors or performance. So yeah, there's always a difference between, they say with constructive criticism, for example, you can criticize or critique a behavior and offer up ways to maybe improve, but you never want to reject someone as a person or make it something personal, because the person always has something positive to offer, even if they need, let's say, practice or experience. The most successful servant leaders are those who have become skilled, empathetic listeners. So again, it goes back to listening. If you can listen with empathy and really seek to understand the other person, then you grow yourself as a servant leader. So if you go to the next trait, healing. I like this one. The healing of relationships is a powerful force for transformation and integration. One of the great strengths of servant leadership is the potential for healing oneself and one's relationship to others. So again, I think that's important to hear, because sometimes when we think, we might think of servant leadership and say, oh, it's all about other people. But I want people to understand this part. Healing yourself is a very important part of servant leadership. And really only by healing yourself can you be effective at servant leadership. Many people have broken spirits and have suffered from a variety of emotional hurts. And we've probably all seen that, both with ourselves and with other people, that a lot of people can be hurt in a lot of different ways. Although this is a part of being human, servant leaders recognize that they have an opportunity to help make whole those with whom they come in contact. In his essay, The Servant as Leader, Greenleaf, so the guy who basically started this movement, writes, there is something subtle communicated to one who is being served and led, if implicit in the compact between the servant leader and led is the understanding that the search for wholeness is something they share. a wordy way of basically saying by focusing on healing ourselves and connecting with other people, we can heal ourselves and we can heal other people. And a big part of healing is connecting with each other and serving each other. Will the power be shared? Absolutely. I've actually shared it with some people who have asked me that said they couldn't be here, but they really wanted to know what was in it. Yeah, this is open to share with yourselves, with anyone else you think would want to see it. It's again, this is I might have quote unquote written it, but it's really not anything that came from me. This came from the research. I just kind of put it together. So if we go to the next slide, we go into awareness. I think this will go with empathy, especially. General awareness and especially self-awareness strengthens the servant leader. And it's interesting because most of us, if we've ever done leadership programs, and so many of us have run them, self-awareness is usually the first thing we focus on. And I think this is probably why. Awareness helps one in understanding issues involving ethics, power, and values. It lends itself to being able to view most situations from a more integrated, holistic position. So yeah, if you're self-aware, you're constantly thinking about what your role in something is. In other words, if I'm looking at a situation, I might say to myself, how much power do I have in a certain situation compared to someone else? What are the things that are most important to me, or what are my values? What matters? What are my ethics? In other words, what would I be willing to do, but also what am I not willing to do in certain situations? And it says, as Greenleaf observed, awareness is not a giver of solace, it is just the opposite. It is a disturber and awakener. Able leaders are usually sharply awake and reasonably disturbed. They are not seekers after solace. They have their own inner serenity. So it's not that we haven't done self-healing, but I think, as most of us know, if we're really thinking about an issue and ourselves, and we're thinking about our values, and we're thinking about our ethics, and we're thinking about ourselves, it doesn't mean that we're necessarily going to find a extremely peaceful place. Instead, we're going to be kind of more, there's going to be a little part of us that might be shaken a little bit by it, because if we think really hard about how we kind of address those things, it's not always easy to make the right choice. If we're really going to live our values, that's not always easy. If we're going to really take our ethics seriously, then that's not always an easy thing. In fact, a lot of times we learn more about our own values and ethics by being presented with a situation where it's going to be very hard to keep hold of those things or to carry them out. And then we, in spite of how hard it is, carry them out anyway. That's, I think, where we really learn a lot about our own values and our own ethics. So if we go on to the next one, persuasion. I like this quality because persuasion is very different than me saying, well, we're going to do this because I'm the one in charge. I'm in charge, so we're going to do it this way, and we're going to kind of gear everything towards what I want. Excuse me. So this is very much the opposite. Another characteristic of servant leaders is reliance on persuasion rather than on one's positional authority. It's a fancy way of basically saying, rather than me saying, I'm the leader, we're going to do what we want. In making decisions within an organization, the servant leader seeks to convince others rather than coerce compliance. So my job isn't to tell you what to do, it's to convince you that I have a good idea, and here's why I think it's a good idea. This particular element offers one of the closest distinctions between traditional authoritarian model and that of servant leadership. The servant leader is effective at building consensus within groups. That's the other thing about being a servant leader, is I'm not trying to convince, let's say there's 10 people. Well, I'm not just trying to convince 6 people that I'm right and then ignoring the other 4. I'm not just trying to get people to vote for my idea. What I'm actually trying to do is I'm trying to essentially help everybody get to a place they're comfortable with as a group. And because you have a group that has diverse ways of thinking and doing things, that means I'm going to have to approach it differently for each person. And maybe while I do that, I'm also going to have to change how I'm thinking a little bit about it. Because if I just keep the same idea, well, that's probably not going to go over well with the other people in the group. I should be as affected by my discussion with them as they are. This emphasis on persuasion over coercion finds its roots in the beliefs of the Religious Society of Friends, Quakers, the denominal body to which Robert Greenleaf belongs. And that honestly doesn't surprise me all that much. In fact, and you could correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I believe, didn't Wendy give a quote from someone who was a Quaker as part of her farewell speech?
Yes, she did.
Yes, and that's why I said this doesn't surprise me at all when I read that. To give a shout out to Wendy, even though she's not here, that definitely kind of fits, I think, when I read that. But yeah, it's very much about how do you convince other people to come on board, not I'm going to make you come on board. So conceptualization, this is a kind of wordy one and a long one, but I'll explain. Emotional intelligence. Yeah, I mean, very much a lot of this is emotional intelligence. You kind of think of it the same way as if I'm trying to build an effective relationship or friendship with someone. Well, if I simply beat into their head, you know, I'm going to make you my friend and you're going to be my friend no matter what. Well, you might not have a great relationship because then it's me forcing them to do something. But if instead of forcing them to do something, I'm actually trying to convince them and show them that would be a good idea because here are the things that I'm willing to sacrifice myself, and here are the ways I think about things, and here's how you think about things, and here's how they fit together. Yeah, it's very much about emotional intelligence. Without emotional intelligence, I don't think you can have servant leadership because you won't be able to, the empathy won't be there, the listening won't be there, and the sharing of power just can't be there without the emotional intelligence. And the self-healing too. I mean, that's a big part of it. Servant leaders seek to nurture their abilities to dream great dreams. So yeah, it's all about, it's not about, let's say, a specific style of leadership or trying to get everyone to be a specific type of leader. It's starting with each person's abilities first. The ability to look at a problem or an organization from a conceptualizing perspective means that one must think beyond day-to-day reality. So it's a tough one because sometimes, and we all know this, we've got in positions where we have so much going on that we just think, okay, how am I going to get through the day? How am I going to get to tomorrow? And when I get to tomorrow, how am I going to get to the next day? But it's kind of going beyond that. It's looking at more long-term thinking. So this is a characteristic that requires discipline and practice. The traditional leader is consumed by the need to achieve short-term operational goals. And that can be very true. I know that as someone who's been in positions where it's very much, I need to accomplish this goal by this time. I need to get this done by this time. It's very much based on short term. How do I get to where I need to go? The leader who wishes to be a servant leader must stretch his or her thinking to encompass broader based conceptual thinking. Within organizations, conceptualization is by its very nature a key role of boards of trustees or directors. So ideally, if you're wondering why do we have a board, or you're wondering why does an organization have to have directors at all? Well, because the idea behind them is you have your people that are doing the operations, but then you have this group of people as a board or as directors whose job is to think beyond just, hey, we're getting the day-to-day stuff done. They are really there to say, well, here's our larger vision, and here's what we see as the big picture. Their job is to make sure that, for example, if I'm working at the Developmental Disabilities Council as the everyday person, the job of a board or of a director is to say, let's think beyond just what you're doing now and make sure that we remember our big picture goals. That's really why you have a board of trustees or directors. So with allies, with our board, same thing. How do we keep long-term goals in mind and long-term vision and long-term kind of hopes and dreams? Unfortunately, boards can sometimes become involved in day-to-day operations, something that should be discouraged, and thus fail to provide the visionary concept for an institution. Now, that doesn't mean that you have board members that are completely disconnected from the work, because most boards have people that are very much connected to the work that's going on. What they mean is you don't want to have the board necessarily be the exact same group that's also doing day-to-day operations. You want to have some separation between the two of them. And you always want to have a focus on things that are kind of outward. Um, Trustees need to be mostly conceptual in their orientation. Staff needs to be mostly operational in their perspective. And the most effective executive leaders probably need to develop both perspectives within themselves. So that's, I think, key. People that are in a director position, so a board of directors, for example, you're mixing both, because a board of directors really does do day-to-day work. If you look at a lot of modern day companies, for example, or let's say, especially nonprofits, this happens. The directors do a lot of work. There's not really a nonprofit where the board of directors just kind of sits there and shows up every couple of months. That's not how nonprofits can't afford to do that. Even large ones can't afford to do that. Really, you have to balance both. You have to be able to do the day-to-day work, but you always have to be willing to keep the long-term in mind. That's very, very important. Servant leaders are called to seek a delicate balance between conceptual thinking and day-to-day operational approach. So again, we are very much on the ground and doing day-to-day work. We're not just saying, here, we're going to dump it on someone else to do it for us. But we also aren't saying, what are we going to do? Well, let's just get to the next day. We're very much about, how does what we're doing now affect our goals in 3, 4, 5 years from now? And are we making sure that they're fitting together? Because if I'm doing day-to-day work that's not really helping me get towards the larger goal, I have to be willing to stop and say to myself, why am I doing this then? How does this going to fit with the larger goals that we have? And are we making sure that the everyday work we're giving to people lines up with those long-term goals? If you're managing, for example, you don't even have to be a director. If you're a manager, even if it's just of a project, if I have people working, quote unquote, under me, am I making sure that the work they're getting is helping them grow towards feeling like they're participating in reaching the long-term goal? Because if not, then there's a problem. So it's very important to think about that also when delegating to other people. You don't want to keep all the really cool conceptual work for yourself and give everyone else the nasty day-to-day things that nobody wants to do. If you're a servant leader, you should actually be the first one who's probably willing to take on the stuff that, quote unquote, nobody wants to do. I mean, that's really part of being a servant leader, is showing that you're willing to do that. So go to the next concept here. I believe there's 10 of them. Foresight. And I'll explain what this means. It's related to the last one we just went over, which is conceptualization, or just kind of, instead of saying conceptualization, because that's a big word, just think looking at the big picture is how I like to think of it. Closely related to looking at the big picture, the ability to foresee the likely outcome of a situation is hard to define, but easier to identify. So in other words, foresight is something that you might be able to see. You would probably be able to give an example of it, but if someone said give a definition of foresight, you'd have a very hard time coming up with one that makes a lot of sense. I know for me that's true. I could tell you what foresight looks like, but if I was to give you a definition, it wouldn't make a lot of sense. One knows foresight when one experiences it. It's a characteristic that enables a servant leader to understand lessons from the past, the realities of the present, and the consequences of a decision for the future. So if someone has foresight, they could take a lot of lessons that they've learned and look at a situation and say, I have a good idea where this could end up in the future, because I can look at the past and it's kind of like if someone says they could see the future. Someone who has foresight, maybe a little bit more than most people, they can see the future. They'll make predictions about things, for example, based on what they've seen. And then you look at things 6 months later, for example, and you say, wow, they were really on. They were spot on with that. They were able to guess what happened. Or they take on a campaign and somehow it seems like they're able to reach people really well, and they were able to predict how people would react to something or what would cause them to be motivated. That's foresight. It is also deeply rooted within the intuitive mind. Foresight remains a largely unexplored area in leadership studies, but one most deserving of careful attention. Yeah, how well can someone see into the future? And that doesn't mean someone has to, it's not magic. It's just someone is able to really learn from the past, and they're really good at looking around them and saying, I could see all these different things happening. And because of those two things, I have an idea of what's going to happen. And because I have an idea of what's going to happen, I'm going to set us up for success. That's foresight, if that makes sense. Stewardship. I like this idea because this is very important. Peter Block, author of Stewardship and the Empowered Manager, has defined stewardship as holding something in trust for another. Robert Greenleaf's view of all institutions was one in which CEOs, staff, and trustees all played significant roles in holding their institutions in trust for the greater good of society. And I think hopefully this gets into it, but if not, I want to talk about, they're talking about institutions. I want to talk about this on a personal level though as well, because I think that's really important. Servant leadership, like stewardship, assumes first and foremost a commitment to serving the needs of others. It also emphasizes the use of openness and persuasion rather than control. Something I think that's really important about the way, and maybe this is not necessarily a perfect definition of servant leadership because it's something I try to practice. I do it imperfectly, but one thing I always think about whenever I'm thinking about leadership is there's always going to be someone else in this role after me. I'm not going to be in the position I'm in forever. There's going to be someone after me and someone after them and someone after them. Am I going to put them in a better position than the one I started in? That to me is kind of what stewardship means at a personal level. Am I setting everyone else up to be successful? And am I setting everyone else up to be able to step into my position if for some reason I can't be in it? If I am, great. If not, then I need to get to that point with someone. And they're talking about that as far as what does that mean at an institutional level? It means if we have allies, for example, and we're talking about our role as leaders, then we're kind of asking ourselves the question, am I leaving allies in a better position than when I got there? I think that's the simplest way to think of stewardship is, I have this thing, I've been given a lot of trust by people, whether it's being a member of board of directors for an organization or being a leader of anything, just as an individual. So I then owe it to the organization or to the other people to make sure that everything is in a better position than when I started. Whether that means as an institution, we're closer to our goals, we're better set up for success in the future, we're mentoring people so that they're better prepared than we were to take over. I mean, it's kind of like if you have kids, you always say, well, I want my kids to be better than I was, which is very true. I think I understand that now better that I have an 8-year-old. I do want them to be better than I am. That's the dream, I think, of every parent that wants to be a good parent. I think it's the same with every leader, is that we want everyone behind us to be better than we are. We want everyone that's going to come after us to be better than we are. We want the people who maybe we're leading now to be able to take over and do a better job than we could have ever done. That's really, to me, what stewardship is. So if we go on to commitment to the growth of people, I like this because it's a little bit easier to understand than something like conceptualization, which is a great word, but it's kind of wordy. It's not plain language. Servant leaders believe that people have an intrinsic value beyond their tangible contribution as workers. Simple way to put it, we're not just our labor or our work. We don't just have value because we can give people this much work. We have value well beyond that as human beings. As such, a servant leader is deeply committed to the growth of each and every individual within his or her organization. The servant leader recognizes the tremendous responsibility to do everything in his or her power to nurture the personal and professional growth of employees and colleagues. In practice, this can include, but is not limited to, concrete actions such as making funds available for professional development. Yes, so getting chances to learn, giving everyone those chances, not just having it be something where you have to get to a certain level, but every single person should be able to, learn more about things they're interested in within the organization and be able to grow so that they're able to take on different tasks within the organization too. Taking a personal interest in the ideas and suggestions from everyone. Yeah, I mean, if you have a good organization, you're committed to people growing, then you take their ideas seriously and you take their suggestions seriously and you let them actually take a role in helping create the organization itself. Encouraging worker involvement in decision making. Again, same idea. Yeah, if people don't feel like they're involved in making decisions, they start to tune out and they start to become less committed and less invested because they don't feel like their contribution matters. And actively assisting laid off employees to find another position. Well, I won't really go into that last one because that's not really as relevant. But in other words, the way maybe to think of that last one is, let's say someone is in Allies and for whatever reason they move on. Well, I would then say, or if someone comes to me and says, I want to be, I want to practice leadership. Maybe I don't have anything available within Allies, but I say, here are places you can go to develop as a leader, even if it's not my personal organization. Because I do say to myself, okay, what can I provide them? Even if it's not something that I myself can give them, can I get them to someone who can give it to them? Someone who maybe has an opportunity that I don't have. But yeah, there's a lot about, I think in this kind of model, it goes back to listening. You spend most of your time really talking with people and then listening to what they tell you. And I really, in most conversations that I have, whether it's trying to help people find resources or even conversations around just talking with someone about, let's say their feedback on a long-term plan, I probably spend maybe at most 20% of the time talking. Most of the time, maybe 80% of it is me listening to them and writing down what they're saying and trying to make sure I understand where they're coming from and their feedback. Because that's the important thing. What I think, I already know what I think. I don't need to spend time on that. I need to spend time on what the other person is thinking. That's really what matters in servant leadership. Yeah, really, if you're a servant leader that's relying on people to be, to build people up to be their own leaders, well, if you have enough people like that, then you have a community. Then you have a group of people that are kind of self-determined and can, really act, to create their best community they can. Well, then, yeah, you have a community of people, an effective community. So the servant leader senses that much has been lost in recent human history as a result of the shift from local communities to large institutions as the primary shape of human life. So in other words, what they mean by that is a lot of things have shifted away from what does the local group think of something into what does this much larger either group or institution or body of people that maybe isn't as connected to the local community, what do they think? And then when they make a decision, we're going to kind of make the local community adapt to it. Instead of, well, the local community is going to make the decision themselves, whether or not it matches with what the other groups want to do at all. So this awareness causes servant leader to seek to identify some means for building community among those who work within the given institution. Yeah, it's kind of like, this sounds kind of corny, but if you can create like a family, almost a family atmosphere within an institution, where, okay, within this very large group, it might be hard for us to feel like, among these thousands of people, maybe the few of us don't feel all that significant, but within our own project, we're going to make it a family atmosphere. We're going to do things in a way that benefits us as a whole group. We're going to make sure that we're all doing things that we feel like benefit ourselves and then the group as a whole. Servant leadership suggests that true community can be created among those who work in business and other institutions. So that's key. You could be in a large institution or a very large group and still build a community within that. Greenleaf said, all that is needed to rebuild community as a viable life form for large numbers of people is for enough servant leaders to show the way, not by mass movements, but by each servant leader demonstrating his or her unlimited liability for a quite specific community-related group. I think what's really telling about that is with servant leadership, the focus is not on what do I do in public when all the attention is on me. That's still important. Obviously, I don't want to do something negative in that situation, but the focus isn't on that. It's really on, okay, when the spotlight isn't on me at all, when maybe no one even knows what I'm doing, what do people think of me when I'm in that situation? What am I doing when I don't have everyone paying attention to what I'm doing, when it's not going to maybe benefit me at all to do it? What then do people see me do? Do they see the same person? In other words, if I'm saying I need to be all these things and when the lights are on me, yes, I am. Am I the same person when the lights are off? Am I the same person when I'm not in the official leader role? Am I demonstrating the same caring and compassion for people when I'm just interacting with people that I am when I'm, doing an official role? I kind of think of it this way. All of us are in roles where we have very public things we do and we have very private things. The public things might be we have to, write reports, or we have to show up at community events, or we're doing presentations in front of large groups. Maybe the private thing is we take a phone call from someone who's really in desperate need of help and they don't know where to go. And they might not know anything about us at all. They might not know our first name. They just know they need help. So are we being consistent in both those situations? Are we kind of using the same ethics and values in both situations? Are we taking them both with the same level of kind of seriousness? Are we showing the same care and compassion for the one person that might come to us when nobody else is there as we do to a whole group when they're there? That's really what that means as a servant leader. So if we go next, I think we might have gotten through all of them. Be a good listener. This is very similar to what we already kind of talked about, but when people feel genuinely heard, they're more likely to take action that drives a positive societal outcome. Yeah, if you want to feel like people around you are, I'll hear this a lot, people will say, well, we want people to kind of do their share, or we want people to be invested. Well, to do that, they have to feel heard. If they don't feel like I'm listening to them, then yeah, I'm probably not going to get their best effort because they're not going to feel ownership over it. Listening to stakeholder concerns and ideas is a crucial element of servant leadership, and all it takes is a focused ear. So again, yeah, a lot more effort goes into me listening than me telling them what I think. I already know what I think. I don't need to tell someone else. I need to hear what they think. Stay self-aware. Everyone has different strengths and weaknesses, and the servant leader is no exception. It's very matter of fact. We all have different things we're good at. We all have different things that maybe are harder for us. The more they can honestly self-reflect about their competencies, so what we're good at and what we maybe struggle with more, the better they can share the workload and collaborate with coworkers. Yeah, the idea, again, is we all have strengths and weaknesses, but if we work together and put ourselves together into a diverse group, we all have strengths that can make up maybe for someone else's weakness, and maybe we have a weakness, but we can find someone who's better at that. And if we find the person who's better at that, great, let them be better. Instead of me saying, well, I'm jealous that this person is good at this, or I feel threatened because this person's much better at this than I am, I say, well, great, that'll make the organization better if they're good at this and I'm not. Let them do it. Let them take control and power over that area, because why not? So that's the difference in staying self-aware from a servant leadership perspective. Focus on the community. Yeah, we've gone over that too. I love the way this is written. Every servant leader emphasizes inclusion. And that's a big part of our mission and vision. So I think it's really telling that that's what this says. When a workplace comes together under shared ethics, interests, and goals, it fosters a sense of belonging, thus helping employees discover a sense of purpose in their work. Again, it goes back to consensus building. It's not, I'm going to force you to share the same ethics and goals and interests as me. It's, I'm going to listen to everyone in the group, and we're all going to put our different ethics and goals into the same group. And by doing that, everyone's going to feel like they have a purpose for what they're doing and a purpose for being a part of the organization. And that's really the key to recruiting too, is, does someone feel like they have a purpose and that their strengths and their talents and their goals matter to the group? Communicate honestly. And this can be a tough one in servant leadership, because there's a very fine line between being honest in a helpful way and maybe being more along the lines of, I don't want to say cruel because that's not the right word, but maybe not being as constructive. Open and honest communication across all levels of an organization is the fastest way to servant leader to build trust. Yeah, it's very important if I'm a leader that I don't mislead anybody. So sometimes, and I know this is a weakness of mine, I can tend to not want to be the person to tell someone bad news. So I try to make my message sound a little bit less harsh. The weakness in that sometimes is that can put myself in a position where I have to say, am I being honest? Or am I trying to avoid something that really needs to come up? Tough love, that's a great way to put it. Yeah, sometimes you have to be in that role. At times this means having difficult conversations. Yeah, sometimes, and this happens within groups too. Sometimes within a group, you have an issue where there might be a very honest just split or disagreement or something really hard that comes up that's not going to be easily resolved. It's going to take time. In the long run, however, transparency can be key to organization morale. So again, I really think, I think a lot about this one, because yeah, you have to be able to be constructive and you have to be able to really be communicating in an effective way. But yeah, it has to be honest still, but it has to be empathetic and honest. Honest can't be just venting. If I'm just frustrated and I'm venting at everyone because, well, this didn't get done properly and here's why. If I just come off as emotionally venting, no one's going to care about what I'm telling them. They're just not going to want to be around me. So again, how do I do it empathetically? So if we go to the next slide, show appreciation, very important. When people feel recognized and valued, they're much more likely to continue striving for improved performance. Yeah, if someone's working really hard and they're doing a lot of development and they're growing and I don't appreciate them, how are they going to feel? They're going to feel, they might even feel taken advantage of a little bit. They might feel like, oh, well, I did all this hard work and now you're just going to take all the credit for it. Well, why do I want to work hard? Or why do I want to keep getting better if nobody's going to notice it? Taking moments to recognize someone for something they did well, big or small, can go a long way. And that's not just official plaques, or that's not just through, let's say, parties or celebrations. It's in those everyday moments of those conversations, which only you and that person are there. Are you showing them appreciation? It's that, do people see that private you being the same as the public you? Or do they see a difference? So if we go next here, person of character. I think we all know what this means, but the kind of things that they talk about are integrity. So in other words, honesty. Are you the same person in public or private? Makes decisions based on ethics and principles. So again, if people look at you and they say, even if they say, I don't always agree with what that person decides, but I always respect their decisions. That generally is a person who has very strong ethics and principles. It might be someone you don't agree with all the time, but you can understand why they're making the decision they're making. If I don't understand why someone makes the decisions they make, and they just seem like they go with whatever changes happen, and I don't mean in a positive way. I mean, I make one decision one week and then everyone gets mad, so I completely change what I decided. Well, okay, that's not necessarily a good way to make a decision. That shows that I just am doing what's popular. I'm not actually doing what's principled. Displays humility. So yeah, humility is very much focused on what, things go well in an organization. I'm going to focus on all the contributions that other people made. I'm not going to focus on all the things that I think were great about what I did, because that's not what's important. Serves to a higher purpose in the organization. So yeah, again, if I care more about the other people and about the group than I do about just fulfilling what I want. It doesn't mean that I don't want to feel fulfilled, but the idea again is if I'm serving other people and I'm helping them fulfill their goals, that's going to help me fulfill my own goals better. That's really the whole idea behind servant leadership. Puts people first. And it's kind of ironic because we have groups called People First. A servant leader demonstrates care and concern for others and helps employees meet their goals and growth in the organization. So again, my focus is really on others more than on myself. It's on, do other people feel valued? Do other people feel like they're being listened to? What do other people think about how things are going? I might think they're going great, but have I asked everyone else yet? What's their perception of what we need to do to get better? How do I help them get to that point? How do I empower them? I mean, really, if I'm empowering other people, then that's good. I'm on the right track. So then we have skilled communicator. I don't know if I always fit this bill or not. It's hard because to be a really skilled communicator, you're communicating with everyone. And we know this well in the disability community. We all have different ways of communicating. Not just different devices, but we have different languages. We have different, depending on what type of communication you're using, that can even change the speed at which you're communicating. It could change the way you would emphasize different things. Communication skills are integral to servant leadership, and you will need to ensure you can effectively listen to and speak with your employees while also inviting feedback. What that means to me is when I'm talking to someone, whether it's a coworker, whether it's someone from the community, or whether it's just random person meets me and they want to ask me a question or figure something out, I have to listen to them so I can figure out the best way to talk with them or communicate with them if it's not talking. If I want to listen to them because I want to get an idea of how do they like communicating? How do they feel comfortable? Where's their comfort level with me? What are there certain ways that they like to talk about things? Do they like to refer to themselves in a certain way as someone with a disability? Do they prefer, do they want to do more of the talking? Do they want me to do more of the talking? Do they want me to give them an answer? Or are they someone who they just want options and they'll go from there? They don't need me to give them an answer. That's where the listening comes in. It's really, you have to build your conversation around what the other person feels comfortable with. And in doing that, you'll get a lot further in the conversation. And it's hard. We've all dealt with people who can be very, very tough to communicate with. Maybe they get really emotional in a conversation. I've had that happen where someone's really emotional and they're really, stubborn isn't the right word, but they're really firm is a better way to put it, because they know what they want, they know what they need, and they're going to be very emotional about telling me. It might not be an easy conversation to have, but I still want to listen and say, okay, how am I going to approach this? How am I going to get to them in a way that's effective? What can I say that's going to actually matter to them? So that's skilled communication. Compassionate collaborator. I like this. Communication skills are integral to servant leadership, and you will need to ensure you can effectively listen to and speak with your employees while also inviting feedback. So part of collaborating a conversation is, I don't go into a conversation saying, okay, my goal is to get them this information because I want them to know this and this. I also need to know, what do they want from me in a conversation? Am I giving them what they need in this conversation? Am I getting, feedback? It's not just about me telling them, here are your strengths and weaknesses, here's what I think you can do. They also are people I can learn from too. Maybe if someone calls me, in every call, even if someone is really confused and they sometimes will feel like I'm giving them all the information, I'm learning from them too. Maybe I'm learning from them about, okay, this system isn't, here's how things maybe are going wrong. What can I then learn from that the next time I talk to someone? Maybe somebody's had a certain experience with something that really helps them when they feel really emotional and they feel stuck and they don't feel like they have anywhere to go. Okay, maybe the next person that comes along, I can then give them that. How do they feel like I'm doing with them? Do they feel like I'm doing a good job of meeting their needs that they have? Not just, here's your option to get this disability service, but Do they feel better after having a conversation with me emotionally about where they're at? And if they do, then why? It would be good to know why that is. So again, it's always, there's a lot you want to pay attention to when you're communicating. And I think we're just about to the end. Foresight, we kind of mentioned this already. You want to have your eye on the future. Look at what might impact things. A strong vision for your organization. A way to kind of think of this is if you have someone who's really good with vision and helping make vision statements a reality, that's someone who has foresight. That's the kind of person you want doing your vision statement. That's the kind of person you want on the board of directors that can say, well, here's all the work we're doing, and here's our vision, and here's how the two fit together. That's someone who has foresight. If they can make those kind of things happen, then they're probably someone with a lot of foresight. It can be the type of person who could take decisive action. Yeah. And that could be anybody, not just the quote leader. Systems thinker. And we all probably know this because we've all probably dealt with very complex systems. And in many cases, systems that need to change. Servant leaders need to be comfortable navigating complex environments and be able to adapt to change. Yeah, we're never going to get the perfect situation that's going to work out just the way it should. We're always going to get complicated situations where things don't quite fit. I tell this to Lend participants. Lend is a leadership program. It's not really important what it is. Other than that, the people going into it are professionals from different fields. And especially if they're kind of new to working specifically with the disability community, I kind of use the example of Apollo 13. Their job is going to be square peg and round hole. How do you get the square peg to fit into a round hole? That's really what your job is going to be. It's not going to be you're taking the nice organized puzzle and putting it together exactly the way it's supposed to be put together. That's not how our systems are, quite frankly, work in reality. A lot of times we're the square pegs. The system is a round hole. It just doesn't quite fit that well. Okay, so how do we get it to fit? That's the way we think about things. This type of leadership requires strategic thinking and the ability to effectively lead change in the organization. So yeah, again, strategize. Okay, well, we're at one spot. We have this vision to get to here in the future. How do we bring those together? Well, strategic thinking and strategic planning, path plans, all the different things that we've done in Allies, same thing. A lot of those are basically systems thinking kind of strategies. So if we go next, we're just about done here. I know we have about a minute. Leads with moral authority. Same thing we mentioned already. I mean, basically, does someone lead through their ethics and their values? And do they show those in their everyday life? Again, it's that, if I'm one way in public, but I don't have any ethics and values in private, well, that doesn't speak very well to my moral authority. Then that doesn't make me a very good leader. That makes me someone who is more, I'm kind of hiding. Instead, I want to be someone who's consistent, who people feel like, okay, what I see is what I get with this person. I get the same interactions when I interact with them in private as I do when they're talking in public. It makes people confident. It makes people feel like, okay, I can trust them. These are references for people that want to do more research later on. And I know we're at the 7:50 time, but if you have more time, I'm willing to hear any feedback whatsoever on how you think this went, because this was the first time I did this. TED Talks are great. I didn't cite these, but these are great for anyone who wants to look into this more. Because TED Talks are wonderful ways to do further research.
I think you did awesome. Thank you for this presentation. I needed it today, so I think you did fantastic.
I think I needed it today too.
I think you did a great job, Daniel. Good job on that.
I mean, the main thing is I want you to think to yourselves, is this something I can apply and how can I apply it? I mean, I think that really, how you know this presentation is effective is if you look back and you say, I can really apply this to what I'm doing. And that's really the key with something like servant leadership, is applying it and taking a presentation like this and being able to sit down with it, say, oh, I see how this applies to what I'm doing and what I'm doing, not just in leadership, but I think in life too, really.
Can you share with us
Yeah, I actually was gonna say if we wanted to send it out to everyone, I'm fine with that. Because
Yes,
again, I
please.
just put it together. This is really other people's
It
stuff.
really is inspiring.
And this could help me for my group, Daniel, for the Advocate Friends meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it could help out.
For sure. Yeah, I was thinking about this for the NFB too. Is
Yeah.
it-
This might be, at some point, this might be a good one to share with people first.
Yeah.
Whenever,
something
I'm
else-
more to talk very well.
Yeah.
But
Something
I know
else
there's a lot of information that
Yeah.
I think I needed to hear.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is what I
A
need
lot
to
of it
hear.
I can apply
Yeah.
Yeah,
to
this is what I
my
needed to hear,
personal life.
Daniel. Yeah.
Yeah,
What I
this
would
is what I
recommend
needed to
doing
hear.
too, as a part of this, is there's all the citations are in there, of kind of where I got the information. There's a lot of great stuff that I couldn't put in because I was just trying to summarize it. There's a
Mhm.
lot of great research that can be done well beyond what I put in the PowerPoint too. So there's some great opportunities to kind of learn. This is because the PowerPoint's more just like an introduction to this. There's a lot out there on this.
Yeah. Yeah, this can be really good, Daniel, for a lot of things. Very good job, PowerPoint, definitely. Yeah. There was I have no words for any feedback because you did a good job of researching, and doing this PowerPoint. Yeah, because there's about advocates and a lot of it organizations too, if possible. Yeah, so
Yeah, thank
And-
you for having me, you guys.
Of course. And I like what Amelia said, where she talks about, and she mentioned this in her comment too. She can apply this to personal and professional, because I think as a lot of what I've learned about leadership too is that kind of like what I mentioned about public and private, the two come together a lot more than people realize.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we separate personal and professional lives, but for us in particular, but even I think just for effective leaders, the two really in some ways are together.
Mhm.
I don't think you could separate the two of them all that much.
yeah.
This was very inspiring, and I can see how it would be useful any number of places.
Mhm.
Did you put it together for a particular presentation or conference or whatever?
The funny thing is, I put it together more. Not really. I'm trying to think of the impetus for putting it together. It was
I
really
can-
more,
I
it
can
was a
speak to
topic-
that, Daniel.
Yeah.
This is Barbara. Yeah, what happened is that we were talking about the results of what we shared at our July quarterly board meeting, where we shared our why. What is our personal why? Why are we part of NM Allies? And we compiled all of that and we put it in the minutes so you guys will see it all. But I was sharing all of that, and Daniel and I and Amira were actually looking through it, and all of a sudden Daniel's like, you know what this reminds me of? And we said, what? And he said, servant leadership. And I said, oh, awesome. And yeah, it's very much like servant leadership in that you're putting others ahead of yourself. And so then Daniel goes, what do you think about putting together a training on that? And all of
Yeah.
our board of directors can go to it. And I said, absolutely, let's do it. So
Yeah, it was
anyway,
more-
yeah.
It was more for us. It wasn't like I didn't think of a conference. I thought more of like this is something that would be cool just to talk about amongst ourselves.
Mhm.
Well, I think I've really got your number now, because I think that's who you've been all along, and Barb and the rest of our leaders, I think that's who you are.
Yes.
It's wonderful to see it defined and augmented and said out loud, but I have sensed that within you all this time.
Well, that's
Um,
good.
Mhm.
Great.
Yeah.
I agree with Carol very much, and you know Daniel, you did a great job
And
delivering it.
of course, if you have any place you think we could present this, feel free. I mean, I'm open to presenting it to whoever.
I
And
will say,
let me talk with Richard if you could do it for all me, like the Friends for Forever. Or,
Or if you all want to present this as well, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of you that
Yeah,
could probably present this
absolutely.
too.
yeah, maybe
Feel
you could
free.
present in Norman, but I'll talk to Richard about it.
Yeah.
And I can talk.
And you guys, we need to go back to Lindsay. Lindsay was trying to say something.
Oh, it's okay. Uh, now I don't even know what I was gonna say, but I do think if if you or whoever is taking this show on the road, so to speak, um, it might not be a bad idea, and I can help you with this if you want to take it on at all, is to write a kind of plain language version of this.
Yes. See.
Which, like I said, I can help you with that if you want. I really appreciated how you read the quotes because they are what they are, and then you did a really great job of summarizing them.
Mhm.
They're very wordy.
They are,
Yeah,
but you
it
did a
was really
really
wordy and,
Yeah,
and
but
an
you,
awful lot of text there. But you did a good job of explaining it because I have a really hard time unless I see so I have it broken down in kind of almost a bullet type form or with some more visual to it. But I think it was
Yeah.
good that you were really good at interpreting it. Like you know, I had a hard time just reading it,
Yeah. It's
understanding it, but you took it to another level and made it much more real.
when I think that if there was one thing that would be kind of cool to do with the PowerPoint, if we were to present it, I think we definitely want to add visuals and yeah, probably make a lot more bullet points. In other words, kind of break apart the quotes and put it into
Exactly. And you were doing that. I mean, you were doing that in your head to us.
yeah. But a
But
visual that would be good too, because
yeah, it
yeah,
would be
it's hard
great.
to read.
It would be great because it is hard to read.
Like when I read conceptualization, I was like, oh man, that's a complicated.
I know.
And I like
Yeah,
the
I
example.
mean, you were, go ahead, Amira.
Oh, go ahead. I just liked his examples.
Yeah, I did too.
Yeah, I thought you were very good with the general examples. I wonder how it would be or how it would strike people if you gave specific examples of an incident that happened to you or to somebody else.
I think that would be a good thing to put in. Like if we were to do this PowerPoint for a group, I could see all of us being asked, what's an incident that might apply to each of these or some of these, and then sticking those kind of in the PowerPoint as kind of like
Yeah,
learning
those
examples.
little stories would illustrate.
Yeah, because it's much better as a story than it is as a, here's a set of quotes.
Yeah. I
Anyway.
like that, but adding that personal touch.
yep.
I know I wrote in the comment, something that stuck out is being the same person both in professional and personal.
Yeah.
And I know that's something I need to work on because I often don't feel like I'm the same when I'm in the professional setting as I am when I'm in my personal setting.
And it's tough. I mean, I know even for me, I've struggled at times with that. It's hard because it's very. I know for a lot of us, professional or let's say the formal leadership, it can be tiring, and sometimes you want to get away from it and be like, okay, I'm going to do something else with myself.
Yep. Yep.
And not
Yeah.
have to kind of carry this over.
Yeah. Well, I feel like too that got harder because of the pandemic. Like me, my personal and professional is basically in the same space. And yes, I try to create visual separation, but sometimes it's not enough.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think separation itself is necessarily a bad thing. I think it's important to have some space to
Some of
kind of
that's easier, but you
debrief,
have separation.
get away. But
Separation.
yeah, that would be interesting. That would be something else if we were to do it in front of a group is to talk more about what's the difference between public and private. Because I think, yeah, I wouldn't suggest to anyone, always be on 24/7, never take a break. That's how you burn out. But I think it's more, how do you, it's a delicate balance because, yeah, you don't want to always be in leadership mode. Sometimes you want to be in rest mode or in I'm doing something personally mode that has nothing to do with it. But at the same time, there is you want your conduct to kind of be consistent. It's kind of like we're always in some ways representing ourselves. So we want our conduct to be somewhat consistent with, our ethics and values. We don't want them to change completely when we come out of leadership duty.
Hey,
That's what-
Daniel. Oh, excuse me. Vashad has his hand up.
Oh, yeah, sorry, go ahead, Bashad.
I was gonna say, yeah, this topic, this could be also not just called servant leadership, but maybe later on in the future, this could be also called like servant entrepreneurship, because there are some business people out there, like Steve Jobs, that or other ones that are like not micromanagers, that do this kind of leadership. And that's what you sent down tonight, was really informative about. It was good that you shared this with us, and yeah, so thank you for that, and yeah, we could definitely use this for any agency. And what Amelia said too, both professionally, yeah, it gets kind of tricky, to do both, like be both, and stuff enough stuff that to but luckily, when you try instead of giving up, you're doing the right thing, of keep trying, to be excelling and be like, not be perfect, but just excelling and what you're trying to be as an individual. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Thank you, Vashad. Hey, I wanted to let everybody know it's already 8:04. And so we usually go ahead and end our stakeholder meeting at 8. And I appreciate it that we have this opportunity to have Daniel here doing the servant leadership training, and all of you joined in. Thanks so much. Any last words, Daniel, or?
I'm really excited about, I would love to take this presentation to have people do the various edits we've talked about. Because I think that would be really cool to add those things in.
That sounds
I'm
great.
up for it.
Me too.
Yeah, me three.
Me 4. Yeah. All righty. Anybody else? Because I'm going to go
Love and
ahead and
hugs to everybody.
hugs in.
Hugs.
Hugs, everybody.
everyone.
Thanks so much.